Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Friday morning. I really appreciate your service, your leadership, and your commute. Thank you to President Green, Carmel, Imran, Jasmine, Valerie Wimes for all making this day possible. When I had the pleasure of being an undergraduate student at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, I came across a faculty mentor who recruited me to serve as editor-in-chief of our student publication. At that time, I was 19 years old, and I had a big leadership position to step into. One day, when we were looking at our photo shoot photos for our next issue of the publication, the advisor took me aside and said, "Sonya, I need to speak with you. Did you know your writers, your photographers, your graphic artists, and some of your most pristine writers are sleeping in their cars? Some are international students. They don't know where their next meal is going to come from. They don't know how the food system in America works, and they are sleeping in their cars, but yet they make time to make this magazine possible." At the time, my response was, "Isn't there a student success advisor? Isn't there a dean of student services? Isn't there a coordinator?" But I thought to myself, maybe it's not about who is a leader. Maybe it's not about who is in the institution. Perhaps it's about who can I serve, and is it my time to communicate with my staff, my colleagues, and my constituents in a more open way, and not just for the purpose of what we're here for. In fact, my name is Sonya, but up until 4th grade, my colleagues would delightingly call me lasagna, because in my household, we followed a halal diet, and my parents are Iranian immigrants. And so when I grew up in New Jersey, we had to travel about 3 miles in our local neighborhood to get ethnic food, and about 3.5 hours to get to our local halal or kosher place to get a meal. So while I could have spent that 3 hours studying, hanging out with friends, or developing a new project for class, I was in the car of my parents' Honda Civic waiting to go to Paterson, New Jersey to find accessible food. And so food was always a part of my identity. And so while I have the pleasure and the privilege of not having to have suffered from food insecurity, I do know a great many of my colleagues who have experienced very high or extremely high levels of food insecurity. And so I welcome the Center for Global Food Engagement in Los Angeles. We see over 4 in 6 children yearly suffering from food insecurity at the K through 12 level. When they get to college, that doesn't change. 2 in every 3 students does not know where their next meal will come from. They rely on ramen noodle soup, their local food pantry, or their dining meal plan. And if I go back to my case, when I was in college and when I was in high school, elementary school, and kindergarten, our meal plan wasn't accessible to me. In fact, the cafeteria lady came to me one day and said, "Sonya, it's Friday, we have cheese pizza for you." And by that time, I thought it was humorous, but I did not take it lightly. And that followed me to see, when I'm walking around campus, when I see a local food court, is that really where I am? Is where I am who I am? The purpose and importance is the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated food insecurity at the local level as well as the global level. For halal and kosher food, we see a lot of that produced and the poultry coming exported through Australia and New Zealand respectively. And in Los Angeles, it's less than a $500 million market. Yet we have over 8 million residents who follow a halal or kosher diet collectively that affects their meetings, the jobs they pursue, the commute time, where they go for their lunch break, and how they have these conversations about food at the dinner table with their families. So sometimes we see campus food pantries. In fact, in 2018, a young individual who was going to study political science at a university in Los Angeles was on a campus tour in her senior year to see where would I go for college. Her mother, during the lunch break, went over and saw a long line and assumed that it was a line for the local theater performance. Little did she know that that line was in fact for the food pantry. When she asked the food pantry coordinator, "Why is there a line?" she said, "Simply because parents cannot afford their students to go on a meal plan, and international students are not aware of food that they can have at the campus dining hall, so they must rely on the food pantry as their only option." Taking aghast at this billion-dollar university, she decided to tell her student, "If you get admitted here, and if you come here, I want you to change the foods that go into this pantry. I want you to think of not only your next meal, but your roommate's next meal, and the students who are in your respective program in political science to take a look at this issue." And so she has. And we've been collaborating on the center at the university level to see how do we advance student success. If hunger is on your mind, If hunger is preventing you from living a quality social life, if hunger is a part of your story, you cannot live to your fullest potential at the academic and professional level. If hunger is always on your mind, your community cannot align with your values. Your community cannot be a part of your family history, your family legacy, and your generational cohort of scholarship, professional advancement, and development. So we seek campus food pantries as well as food banks who have relied on places of worship. They are not funded at the level that they should. They have foods that are very low in macronutrient content and foods that are very high in trans fat and sodium. So it actually perpetuates the cycle of food insecurity. And we see foods that you can get at a grocery store, foods that are donated through the Good Samaritan law, and no one's really screening if it's good food. What does the sell-by date mean? Sometimes these labels, frankly, could be meaningless. But it also affects the student's diet when they have to perpetually think, where is my next meal coming from? Why do I have to get food from the pantry? Why can't I get food that I'm accustomed to consuming, or food that I could have that could help performance and can help endurance? The design of cities also impacts this. So I encourage you all to take a look at Fairfax Avenue, Wilshire Boulevard, Olympic Boulevard, and to take a look at the nearest radius of a food store. And if you see that same exact food store of what they offer, whether it be a grocery store, a convenience store, or a strip mall of a food retailer, and ask yourself if this is somewhere where a university student would go and why. Now, we can't assume that if every community, every university had healthy foods, that they would all consume that and have high macronutrient content, live purposeful lives of service and leadership, and not think about food and hunger. That's just not how diets works. So we look at geography, dietetics, international food, the supply chain, and of course global trade to help solve these issues. And the center's purpose is to bring in researchers, program assistants, and program services so that we can have legislative offices, the Dean of Student Services, food service providers, and students to have a large national conversation about law, policy, and student success. We also need to have equitable distribution. So I'm asking for about $3,000 in startup cost to help for meal delivery plans, where if temporarily your food service needs are not met at the university level, you can have a subscription to a meal delivery plan that will come to your dorm, or if you're a commuter student, at your respective place of residence. And we're also asking for our public relations and licensing fees to help. Food is very challenging, so we ask ourselves, if there was to be a new retailer or a grocery store at your community, what would they need? What infrastructure would help supply their respective needs? Would they have to start from the ground up? Or would they use whatever they have? Would a food pantry and their storage be enough? Or would you have to have non-perishable goods for an entire semester? We also see that cross-exposure of items is respectfully prohibited in some respective ethnic, cultural, religious backgrounds. We also look at student athletes, those who follow a respective diet, and how you must change your gloves, you must not have the food placed within X amount of space from another food, and the menu has to be consistent. And so the educational program that I am suggesting is to have a webinar of weekly speaker series to expand the conversation, have intercultural and interfaith dialogue and diplomacy, and to have law, agriculture, and science at the forefront of the table. Irrespective of your program, we need to have these issues addressed, and I really thank you for your support, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.